Now, for more on China's role in the WTO, I'm joined by Yukon Huang, Senior Fellow with the Asia Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Good to have you again.
My pleasure.
So as we said there, this weekend marks the 20 years since China became a member of the WTO. Talk about some of the major economic reforms China has made since joining in 2001.
Well, it lowered tariffs considerably, reduced export restrictions. It cut out explicit subsidies for exports. It's liberalized capital flows. It more or less facilitated a tremendous increase both in exports and imports. And I think the world benefited greatly. After China joined WTO, of course, China grew much more rapidly, but global growth increased by a percentage point or two. In that sense, the whole world benefited from China's membership in WTO.
So then how has China's role in the WTO changed over those last 20 years?
Well, in the beginning, people were concerned about whether or not China would generate tremendous trade surpluses and whether that would be potentially destabilizing. So in the years immediately after joining, China's surpluses soared, and that was a concern. But over time, with liberalization, with exchange rates adjustments, China's trade surpluses more or less moderated. So today, that's not a major issue. The concerns today are much more around issues like subsidies, because China is basically more of a state-driven economy compared to the market-driven economies in the West. There's also concerns about the role of state enterprises, and there are also concerns about technology transfer. I would say technology transfer is probably the new issue. The movement of ideas, technology across countries creates concerns about who is benefiting. And I think this is a real significant issue that needs more addressing.
Now, I want to talk about China's designation, because we saw that China's ambassador to the World Trade Organization said that China would remain a developing country at the WTO, but plans to forego some of the benefits that come with that designation. What exactly would that mean?
Well, I think this is actually a misconception. If you go back 20 years, when China joined WTO in 2001, it was a lower middle income country, clearly what I call a developing country then. But even then, there was concern about whether it should join as a developing country or a developed country. Well, China maintained its developing country status, but it gave up all the kinds of conditions and flexibility that would normally come to a country that has a developing country status. So that status really did not convey any special benefits. So China joined WTO on the same ground rules as any other country. In fact, it joined under what I would call harsher conditions. There's a special annex to its membership that created special conditions which only applied to China. It didn't apply to any other country. So it's a misleading idea and concept to say that China joined WTO or continues to benefit from what I call developing country status. It really basically does not rely upon any of those terms.
And that is an argument that we do keep hearing, so I'm glad that you cleared that up. I want to shift gears and talk about China's importance in the world's COVID response and economic recovery. How do you see that?
Well, China's COVID response, of course, it recovered faster than practically any other major economy, probably about 6 months to a year faster. It's been able to keep its factories, its exports going. This has been helpful because there is a tremendous demand for goods coming from Europe, from the United States. That's led to a boom in terms of imports in the West from China, and that's kept the economy going. China today accounts for maybe about a quarter of global demand. So keeping up that rapid growth rate, being able to maintain the exports of these manufactured products is certainly helping to the recovery globally. But there are supply constraints globally, shipping problems occurring on. And that's because there are parts and components being produced all over the world. And when you have this kind of problems, bottlenecks, it's actually affecting global supplies. But nevertheless, I would say that China's response to the COVID, the fact that it's recovered more rapidly, the fact it's been able to maintain manufactured goods, that's been helpful to the global economy.
And I want to also talk about the state of the WTO just quickly. What kind of updates or changes does the trade organization need to make moving forward to really better reflect these more complex and interconnected trade relationships?
Well, there's an appellate court that has to rule on key decisions. And that court is not functioning now because the judges have not been appointed. So there has to be an agreement to rely upon the WTO mechanism to talk about contentious issues. If you don't do that, I don't think you can address these major concerns. There are new concerns today that did not exist, I'd say, 20 years ago. The flow of technology I mentioned earlier is a critical one. Subsidies is another issue. There's this concern that China relies a lot on subsidies and that this creates an unfair advantage. Actually, what people don't realize is that everybody subsidizes. That's true in the United States. That's true in Europe. In fact, there are some estimates that would say that there's more subsidies being done in the US than there is in China. But people don't realize that because these subsidies are of a different form. They come from local budgets. They support things like Amazon relocating. It supports the installation and welcoming of new investments from foreign companies. And it tends to subsidize consumers more than it does producers. China's subsidies comes through the banking system more and goes more directly to companies. So the real issue is not whether countries should subsidize or not. They all do. The real issue is the form of that subsidy, how it should be channeled. And we don't have any ground rules. So these are the kinds of issues that need to be addressed by the WTO in the future.
Well, thank you. We do appreciate your insights. Yukon Huang there, Senior Fellow with the Asia Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. All right, still